Before starting the seminar, let me give an introduction to today's speaker, Dr. Michelle Law. So, welcome everybody to today's talks. The title is Earthworm for Sustainable Agriculture. This is the 27th talk of a series targeting to promote agrobiotechnology and enhance understanding of the potential applications of agricultural products. We hope the series will inspire international scholars, researchers, farmers, and business in the agricultural field, as well as the interested public. First, let me introduce our speaker. Dr. Michelle Law is a lecturer in the School of Life Sciences at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Her teaching and research area is ecology, conservation biology, and field study. The main research interest is in soil biodiversity and ecosystem functioning, as well as environmental education. Michelle obtained her bachelor degree in BSc Ecology and Biodiversity and the MPhil degree in Environmental Education at Hong Kong University, and subsequently received her PhD in Geography and Resource Management at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. During her doctoral study, Michelle investigated the land use impacts on earthworm communities in Hong Kong and studied the ecosystem functions of earthworms in soil greenhouse gas emission and nutrient cycling. She has extensive experience in organizing public workshops and educational programs on promoting local terrestrial and soil ecology conservation. In this presentation, Dr. Michelle Law will present an overview of the role of earthworms in enhancing soil health and the growth of plant crops, and ultimately achieving sustainable agriculture. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Michelle Law to the floor. Michelle, please.
Thank you, Professor Lam, for having me. So I'll share my screen. Yes. Good evening, everyone. So I'm so happy to be here and to share my research interest, which is earthworm. And then another kind of focus of today would be the sustainable agriculture. And then just like Professor Lam named about, the kind of topic of today would be how would be the role of earthworm for sustainable agriculture. And yeah, as the introduction that Professor Lam already mentioned about, so I'm now the lecturer of the School of Life Sciences. So if you have any questions or further, if you have any questions regarding the talk of today, so yeah, feel free to ask during the Q&A, or you can even send me email in the future. So first of all, when we talk about sustainability, so I think all of you should notice about the sustainable development goals, because we are facing quite a lot of challenges around the world. So we have running out of food supply, we have hunger problem, and we also have health problem and well-being problem for the humanity. So therefore, to deal with the SDG, we need to think about how would be the solution. Okay, can we deal with the nature, using the natural resources to deal with this kind of problem? So therefore, recently we have a kind of insight, that is, how can we make use of protecting soil to solve this kind of problem? And then ultimately we can achieve the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals. So firstly, we need to notice that for biodiversity in soil, which can support the terrestrial life, of course, because they are very important ecosystem for the terrestrial ecosystem. And then for the soil biodiversity, it also can help with the hydrological processes, because the presence of soil biodiversity, it can amend or it can enhance the water infiltration of the soil. So therefore, it would be take part in the hydrological processes. And then soil biodiversity also can help to regulate the climate because it will be take part in different kinds of nutrient cycling as well as the carbon cycle or the nitrogen cycle. So it can take a very important role to regulate our climate. Lastly, soil biodiversity also support our life. Okay, so it support human well-being because of having a healthy soil, it can help us to have a very or better crops production. Okay, so which is providing us with the food. By looking all of this in together, so you will see that for soil biodiversity supporting the terrestrial life, which can achieve the SDG 15. And then for the hydrological processes, it can support the SDG 6 and 14, and the climate can achieve with 13. And lastly, if we can make use of the soil biodiversity, which can support the human well-being, we already can achieve the SDG for 1, 2, 3, and 8. And then if you trade it all together, it is already half of the SDG. Okay, so this would be highlighting that having the soil biodiversity is a very important to us. And then to summarize why soil biodiversity is so important, because it can provide us with different kinds of ecosystem surveys, as well as to sustain our livelihood of the human well-being. It can support the terrestrial life. We have clean water and aquatic life, and then we can also have climate regulation. And then if we look into different classic group of the soil biodiversity, just from the very tiny bacteria to the mesofauna, just like the mites or the nematodes, and then to the macro-fauna, just like earthworms, that would be the target of today, and then also the macro-fauna. So they just play different role to deal with this function. Okay, so just like earthworm, you will see that it just can achieve all of these functions. Because of this kind of importance, the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of UN, they also suggested that, or they already have different kinds of public campaign to promote we should protect the soil by having a good soil biodiversity. And then they also argue that the soil biodiversity should treat as a leisure-based solution to deal with the environmental problem. So therefore, they treat it as an annual campaign dedicated to soil biodiversity with the theme that we need to keep soil alive, and then we can protect the soil biodiversity. But what is soil biodiversity? Okay, because we do have quite a lot of knowledge for the above ground biodiversity. We know how many birds in the world better, or how many plant species in Hong Kong. But then how about the below ground biodiversity? It's always a mystery. Okay, it's a missing puzzle when we talk about the ecology. And here actually is just showing you a figure that I abstract from a paper, which is published in Nature. So it's just saying that within the soil, we have quite a lot of creatures inside. So just like from the very tiny one to the very big one. And then earthworm should be one of it. Okay, it supports a very important role in the soil. And the importance or the significance of having earthworm in soil also recognized well before. Okay, just like Charles Darwin, I think every one of us, if we study ecology, we know who is he. So Charles Darwin, in one of his publications, The Formation of Vegetable Mold through the ancient worms with observation of their habits, so he highlighted that earthworms have played a very important part in the world than most present would at first. So therefore, if we don't have earthworm in soil, then our life would be a matter. But someone may just think that the worm is just like the insect. But then earthworm, based on the taxonomy, actually it says the entities. Okay, so therefore you will see that they do have the segmented body. And then the other very important publication related to earthworm biodiversity would be come out in 2019. And this would be the first study that to have a very comprehensive evaluation to what would be the global distribution of earthworm diversity. So if you look at this map, so this whole map actually we based on the modeling and then to estimate what would be the number of species, what would be the species abundance, that means the individual per meter square, and then what would be the biomass of earthworm. So we use the gram per meter square. And this tedious study, they collect data from more than 9,000 sample sites, which is within 57 countries. So you can see that the number of sites actually is tremendous. Okay, it's provide a very comprehensive understanding of what would be the density of earthworm. And then based on the model, you can also see that no matter is the number of species, the abundance, and also biomass of earthworm, it's just increased along the latitude. So that means for the European country, you can see they do have the yellow color. Maybe I just use the annotation. Yes, I just the spotlight here. Okay, so just like in Europe, so the number of species, number of earthworm species would be higher than those in the tropic region. And then when we look at the species abundance, the similar pattern would become out. So the abundance of earthworm along just towards the latitude would be much greater than the tropical region. Okay, and then how about the biomass? So you will see that around this region, they do have a greater biomass. But of course, because the study of earthworm or study of invertebrate, we always lack of sufficient support. So therefore, some part of the world, they may have insufficient data to contribute to this study. But at least based on this global distribution, we can identify which part would be the hotspot for earthworm and what would be the conservation effort that we need to work on. And one of the interesting facts is because this study has been published in Science, the journal Science, and this would be the first time that the earthworm become the icon on the journal. So it's also cheer up with those scientists who study on earthworms. So we should work more on it. So other than knowing the global distribution of earthworm, so if we compare we compare the community or the family formation of earthworm between or among those regions, that you will see that we do have some variation on this. So because I study the earthworm in Hong Kong, so Hong Kong actually belongs to the Orbital region. Okay, so we do have 4 major family that would be the worms belongs to, including the Lumbisciate, the Oceodrythiate, the Macro-fauna, and also the Glossodontiaceae. And then I noticed that some of you may come from South Africa. So for South Africa, it would belong to the Ethiopian region. So they do have a little bit different from the earthworm community or composition. So the family would be mainly based on the Lumbisciate, the Macro-fauna, and also the Glossodontiaceae. So actually it's quite a little bit similar to the Orbital region. And lastly, how about the European earthworm? Okay, although the study of earthworm would be much more in the European region. So they do have 3 major groups of earthworm that you may find in those regions. So when we look into the earthworm diversity, especially this would be from South Africa. So I use South Africa as an example. So based on a study that conducted around 2010 to 2015, so they conclude that the number of species that can be found in South Africa would be around 282 species, which is most of them would be endemic to South Africa. So this is a very important information because if we have the endemic species, so that means we may need to have a more, or we need to put more attention on conserving them. And then in South Africa, it also have around 44 introduced species from 6 families. So it may be related to the agricultural activities. So some of the exotic species just introduced to South Africa through the human activities. So therefore, it is giving you a very important information. And then here is a kind of the interesting fact, because South African is quite well known for the giant earthworm. So this would be the one. And then from this global soil biodiversity index, so they just say that if you look at the satellite photo, actually you can even see the footprint of the worm on land. Okay, so this would be the burrowing activities of this kind of giant earthworm. Okay, so if you look at the pictures here, so the earthworm can be so huge. But why earthworm is so important as one group, as a group of soil biodiversity? Because they has been recognized as a ecosystem engineer. So ecosystem engineer, this terminology has been evaluated since 1994. And then the definition of it would be if the organisms that directly or indirectly moderate the availability of resources to other species, just like they changing their habitat for other species, or they enhance the nutrient cycling or other cycles with for the species, so they will take a role to be the ecosystem engineer. So what kind of function that they may pay for? They can causing the physical state changes in biotic or abiotic materials, or they can modify and maintain or even create the habitat. So in short, if we look at the mosaic of function domains of earthworm, so firstly, it can help to change the biogenetic structure of the ecosystem by changing the soil physical structure, because for earthworm, they have different kinds of activities in soil. They feed in the soil, they move in the soil, and then they build the burrow. And this kind of soil physical structure changes can actually cause the water surface, erosion control, and even the climate control for the ecosystem. And then at the same time, by changing the biogenetic structure, it can also facilitate the formation of microbes, other invertebrate, or even the plant communities. So therefore, in long way or in long term, it can help to maintain the decomposition rate and also the nutrient cycling in the whole terrestrial ecosystem. Lastly, being an ecosystem engineer, earthworm can also be an ecological mitigator. So they can help to confirm, or it can help to maintain the relationship between different kinds of animals and plants. And then it can help to maintain the primary production of the whole ecosystem. So therefore, for being an ecosystem engineer, it can help to change the ecosystem with three important approaches. The first one would be the physical engineering, okay, changing the physical environment. Secondly, would be the community engineering. So that's therefore it can help to maintain different groups of animals and plants, and how would be the composition of species for the communities. Lastly, would be the biochemical engineering by producing or by maintaining the primary production in the system. So therefore, we need to understand how the activities of earthworm would be help to play a role as a ecosystem engineers. So we can focus on three different types of activities, just like feeding, because they consume the soil biomass or soil organic matter in soil, and then they will pass through it like this. So it will form the cast of the soil. So this will be casting. And then through their daily movement, so they will also form the burrows like this. So it can help to maintain or help to help to change the physical properties of soil. And then the earthworm, it also can classify them into three different functional groups based on their habitat. So some of the earthworm, they only make use of the topsoil. So they will consume on the leaf litter on the soil layer. So we will name them as the habitogenic species. And then for earthworm, that they will make use of a much deeper soil, but then it is around 5 cm to 20 cm. So we will name them as the endogenic species because they will generate this kind of burrows with a kind of a very dense networking. Last types of earthworm will be the enantic species. So the enantic species will make use of the deep soil. And then based on the previous study, this group of earthworm, they can make use of the deep soil even up to 70 cm or even 100 cm. So they will generate, or they will create the burrow, which is deep down to the soil, but then it will be the kind of the vertical burrows. So because of this kind of different behavior, so it can help the soil, this can help the earthworm to take part in different way in the soil properties. So just like casting, so you can see from this video, okay, so I just captured it during my experiment. So this is how the earthworm casting, okay, once they pass through and then consume the organic matter from the soil particles, so they will just produce the residues like this. And then for a long time, if they just accumulate this kind of cast, then they can even form this kind of tower-like structure in the soil. Okay, so you will see that this tower actually is the soil will be much higher than the other natural soil. Other than that, the earthworm, because their activities will be quite important under the soil, so you can see they can even build different kinds of burrows, and then they can also consume or degrade the leaf litter and then bring the nutrient back to the deep soil. And then by these activities, earthworm can also play a role to change or to maintain the relationship between the plants, because they can even help the plant seed to burrow down to the soil, and they will amend the availability of the seed bank. So to conclude, or to have a summary, so you will see that by having different kind of soil with different different environmental factor, just like change in air or soil temperature, or even the moisture of soil, or even if you have different land use, so you will form different kind of plant community and structure. And then with different plant and community, actually it will also have an impact on what would be the soil community structure and activity look like. But then, very importantly, by having the soil community, it can also have an impact on the greenhouse gas emission because the earthworm, they will just emit carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gas through the cycling, the gas exchange of soil. But then in long term, based on the previous study that conducted by Lube's team, so they just suggest that in long term, by having earthworm in soil, it can help us to stabilize the carbon in soil. And then it can also stimulate the soil aggregation because the earthworm, you see that by having the casting, the soil will just form the aggregates. Actually, it can help us to trap the carbon within the soil other than emitting out to the atmosphere. Because of this kind of basic knowledge, so therefore I'm keen to understand what would be the earthworm communities or earthworm species in Hong Kong. Even if in Hong Kong, because even we do have a very tiny land, but then we have high diversity of habitat, including those rural and also urban habitat. So therefore, in my previous study, I picked 4 types of land use. So including the secondary forest, lateral grassland, urban park, and even the organic farm. So to evaluate what would be the species composition of them and what would be the distribution of species in Hong Kong. And very amazing that we got an amazing result is we found that the biodiversity of earthworm in Hong Kong actually is quite rich because before I conduct the study, we just think that maybe Hong Kong is such a kind of concrete jungle. We do not have much species of earthworm. But then after our ecological survey, we can find that the species that we can record in Hong Kong even more than the quantum profile. Okay, so quantum actually is, Hong Kong is kind of a city in quantum profile. So therefore you will see that Hong Kong, we should pay more attention on what would be the earthworms community here, and we need to conserve them. And based on these species list, you will also see that Hong Kong, our species composition is highly depends on or highly belongs to the Amorphous genus. Okay, so Amorphous is a common genus around Asia. And then this is some kind of example, what can we capture in Hong Kong. And very interesting that we even capture some unnamed new species based on this study. Other than knowing about the species composition, so I also want to identify what would be the factor, what would be the soil parameter that affect the earthworm communities in Hong Kong. So based on the kind of analysis of different kinds of soil parameter, including the nutrient, the total carbon or the total nitrogen, even the air temperature, the pH, and leaf litter volume. So we will see that actually the composition is depends on 2 major factors. One would be the availability of nutrient, and then secondly would be the land management practice. And very interestingly, based on this CCA result, you'll also see that the community of earthworm that from the lateral habitat and also the urban habitat, they do not have the overlapping. Okay, so that means they don't have how to say, so just like for the lateral habitat, we do have the specific community form in these habitat. But then for the urbanized site, we only can find the metropolitan earthworm or the earthworm that would be more adapted to the harsh environment, just like the pH can be very, very low during in this kind of urbanized site. So therefore, land management practice would be a matter to govern the earthworm community in Hong Kong. Other than the species abundance, richness, this kind of ecological data, are also keen to understand what would be the earthworm activities how would their impact on the ecosystem function. Therefore, I study their cost. Okay, so you will see that even in Hong Kong, we can find different form of earthworm cast. So some of the cast can be like the planet-like. So this will be very tiny one. This will be the granular planet-like structure. So, and then in the wild, you can also find the globular tower-like structure, just like what I showed you in the previous slide. Very tall one can be up to 20 centimeter in height. So this is a very big structure, the cast structure. And then other than that, we can also identify the third type of earthworm cast in the wild, which is the head-like structure. So this kind of cast structure would be created by the anatic worm because they just have the leaf litter just on top their burrow opening on the topsoil. Then we just make use of the experiment, the rainfall stimulation experiment. We want to see what would be the kind of the response that if the earthworm cast, they experience the wetting and drying cycle, just like what they experience in the wild, and how would be the influence of the greenhouse gas emission. Then you will see that when we compare different form of cast, actually they have different kinds of emission. Okay, so just like for the hip-like structure, they will emit more CO2 to the soil. But then if we look at the panel-like structure, so actually the cumulative CO2 fluxes would be much less. And then we also have different kind of treatment to the earthworm cast by having the low wetting, the 2-day cycle or the 4-day cycle of the wetting and drying treatment. So you will see that if the earthworm cast do not experience any wetting, they do have much higher cumulative nitrous oxide emission from soil. But then if we have a different kind of cast, they also perform differently in this experiment. And then when we compare the soil parameter, just like the nitrogen content, the total organic carbon, the total N, and also the CN ratio, you will also notice that the wetting and drying cycle actually act differently on carbon and nitrogen dynamics in different earthworm cast. So therefore, based on this result, we can see that by having a higher diversity of earthworm, because for different species, they will produce different form of cast. Actually, it can help us to maintain a better cycle or better carbon and nitrogen dynamics in the soil ecosystem. Other than that, I also want to investigate and what would be the burrow activities of earthworm? How would their role in greenhouse gas fluxes in the soil? So therefore, I picked the most abundant earthworm species. So this would be the amorphous worm in Hong Kong. So they are very common. They can be commonly found in the lateral grassland in Hong Kong. So then we just put them into an incubation experiment for 60 days. And then we have the gas sampling. So we want to test what would be the accumulative greenhouse gas that emitted by them. And then we also conduct a burrow analysis by using the CT scanning. So you will see this would be the the CT scan, and then we just put the whole set of soil core to it, and then we can calculate, or we can evaluate what would be the structure of the burrows. And then we can also put them, in different kind of treatment with the temperature change and also the soil moisture change. So after getting the result, we can see that the key findings will be, because the amorphous worm is an endogenic worm, yes, it can be confirmed by the CT scanning of the burrows because they make use of the topsoil and then up to around 15 cm. And then they could also generate the burrow network, like they are having the horizontal one and also the vertical burrows, just like this. So therefore, we can confirm the amoebous worm that we use in this experiment would be the endogenic worms. And then if we look at the cumulative CO2 fluxes in the 30 days, so you will see that under different level of moisture treatment, they do have different performance in the greenhouse gas fluxes. So in general, the amoebous earthworm, they induce about 28% of the soil carbon dioxide emission. And then they also induce 63% of the soil nitric oxide emission. And this finding actually is quite in parallel with the previous study that I mentioned before, which is conducted by the Lubez team. So they suggest that the presence of earthworm would be induced about 33% of the CO2 emission. So we can confirm that because amoebous worm would be quite abundant in Asian region. So therefore, we should have similar result if we look at the greenhouse gas fluxes or greenhouse gas dynamic that influenced by the presence of earthworm than the European worm. So it would provide us with an insight how would be the Asian worm perform in the soil ecosystem. And lastly, the second part of the today talks. So I just want to more focus on what would be the role of earthworms in sustainable agriculture. Now we confirm that no matter the activities of earthworm, just like casting or burrowing, they play a role in the ecosystem as the ecosystem engineers. So they convert or they change the soil physical structure. They also play a role in regulating the greenhouse gas emission from soil. And then they also perform differently under different kinds of environmental conditions. But what would be their role in sustainable agriculture? So when we talk about sustainable agriculture, our ultimate goal is conservation, right? So we want to conserve our natural resources. We want to make use of our natural resources in a more careful way or in a more wise way. So therefore, it can help our next generation to enjoy the same resources, right? So therefore, conservation agriculture would have a very strong relationship with soil biodiversity. In short, conservation agriculture can make use of soil biological activities and cropping system to reduce the excessive disturbance of the soil. Because when we compare to the conventional agriculture, we always talk about how to till the soil and then how to use the chemical fertilizer or other way to increase the crop yield. But then for conservation agriculture, we just want to reduce the use of those chemicals, of course. And then we also want to minimize the disturbance to soil. We just want the soil to do its own work, okay? But then at the same time, we can also enjoy the increased cropping yield to deal with the food supply problem. Other than that, the conservation agriculture can also help to maintain the crop residue on the soil surface in order to minimize the damage to the environment and also provide the organic matter and nutrients. Because from the conventional agriculture, people always burn the crop residue because they believe that by burning the crop residue can help the carbon or the organic matter back to the soil, which can nurture the soil health. But then actually, this is not the case because when you burn the crop residue, so that means the carbon, the organic matter, will just lost from the system. They just emit to the atmosphere. And this is not a very good practice, especially when we talk about the air pollution problem. So therefore, by promoting the conservation agriculture, we also want to keep the crop residual because they are so valuable in the soil ecosystem, because they are the valuable organic matter and nutrient. So therefore, by achieving the conservation agriculture, the main principle is we want to minimize the soil disturbance, mainly through the direct seeding or no tillage to the soil. And then we also want to maintain the permanent soil cover by putting the plant residue back to the soil. And then we can have the lateral supply of the organic matter through the preservation of crop residue and cover crops. We also talk about the crop rotation for biocontrol and also efficient use of soil profile. We also need to minimize the soil compaction, because if we use the machine in agriculture, so that means the heavy machine will just compact the soil. It is not a very good practice, because if the soil be compacted, that means the gases or the nutrient cannot freely exchange between the soil and also the atmosphere, because you just squeeze them into a very small volume. So therefore, conservation agriculture, we talk about we talk about how to minimize the soil compaction. Lastly, and this is very difficult to achieve, is how can we make use of the increased biological activities in soil and then help us to increase the crop yields. So this would be a matter. And then earthworm, of course, it can play an important role in conservation agriculture, because compared to the whole groups of soil biodiversity, just like when you compare to the macro-fauna, just like the bacteria, the nematodes and soil, or you compare the role of mesofauna, just like the mite, the ant. Actually, earthworm is a better choice when we talk about conservation agriculture, because earthworm is a megafauna, is a macro-fauna. So they do have a very big body mass, and then their activities would be highly under the soil. Because if you talk about the ant, sometimes most of the time, the ant will just come out on the soil surface, and then they seldom drill to the below ground level. But then for earthworm, actually most of them will just stay underground. So therefore, earthworm is a very good choice to be an ecosystem engineer, and then they should take part in the conservation agricultural practice. So therefore, maintain a good earthworm biodiversity in the agricultural soils could be a lateral-based solution to deal with the sustainable agriculture. And here is a kind of study that I selected today. And this study actually is to investigate what would be the role of earthworm for assessing their sustainability as a bioindicator. Because I think some of you also believe that if you were the farmers or you were the gardeners, if you see there are so many earthworms in a soil, you will believe that the soil would be a very good one. It is a very healthy soil. So therefore, we always recognize that earthworm can be a bioindicator for soil health. And from this study, they investigate, or they examine different kinds of conservation agricultural practice and what kind of practice can benefit the biodiversity of earthworm. So they study the total earthworms. Is the annotation again? Okay, so here would be the total earthworms, including the abundance and also the biomass. And then they also reveal different types of crops that to be planted in the agricultural land, okay, including the apples, the peach, the kiwi. And you will notice that for the dark bar here, so this is the untilled land, okay, so untilled patches. And then for the right bar here is the tilled land. So we see that very straightforward. If you always till the soil, the abundance of earthworm and also the biomass of earthworm would be lower. But then if you just leave them as a untilled practice, no tillage practice, then it can help to maintain this earthworm abundance and biomass because less soil disturbance on them. And how about the epigenic group? So remember epigenic, so this would be the earthworm that they make use of the topsoil. Actually, the same or even more significant difference between the tilled and untilled soil you can see. So for the untilled practice, yeah, it's very good. Okay, so the number of the level of the abundance and even the volume of biomass will be much higher than the tilled land. So it can confirm that low tillage practice can benefit the earthworm biodiversity. And the other previous study, so this study would be conducted in South Africa. So this study, they made use of a research farmland. So they perform different kinds of treatment and then to evaluate what would be their earthworm total density, what would be their abundance, biomass, this kind of ecological information. So the treatment that they use is tillage versus no tillage. So this would be the first level. Okay, we talk about the soil disturbance. And then they also perform a treatment with the crop rotation, because crop rotation is also one of the important practice in conservation agriculture. So they select different kinds of crops, including the maize and also the wheat and also the soybean. So they have 4 different types of treatment. 2 of them they allow the land to have a fallow period, so no farming in between the 2 planting period. And then for the other two treatment, they just don't allow the land to take a rest. So they directly plant different crops as a rotation. Okay, so they plant the maize, wheat, then back to the maize again, or they plant the maize, wheat, and then soybean. So soybean is an important plant because they are the legume. It's very have a very strong relationship with the nitrogen. So if we look at the data here, the result here, and you will see that for the treatment with soybean, it would be most beneficial to the earthworm total density. So they just start from this year, and then 2 years later, they conduct the same survey. You will see that the density of worms would be much higher than before. So it's meaning that maybe planting soybeans, okay, with a crop rotation is good for earthworm biodiversity. And other than that, if we allowed the land to rest for a while, that means we have a fallow period for the crop rotation. Most likely, we assume that it would be help to enhance or facilitate the earthworm density or abundance. But actually, based on this study, it seems not the case, because maybe if you allow the land to just stay over to be abundant for a while, so that means the earthworm they may fail to play a role to enhance the lumber or enhance the activities of the microbes. So therefore, in this study, very interesting finding is, since the fallow practice is not always good for maintaining the soil biodiversity. Other than that, if we look at the soil parameter, especially the soil organic carbon, the percentage, and also the micro biomass carbon, so you will see that the treatment with the crop rotation, maize, wheat, and also soybean is also the best treatment to the best treatment to benefit the soil parameter in terms of carbon and also the microbes. So therefore, to conclude, from this study, we can identify some of the key findings. Soybeans, that means the legumes, will be very important in maintaining the soil biodiversity in agricultural soil, because earthworm, they will select the soil with higher carbon materials. So that means if the soil having more organic matter, so they will love that kind of soil, and then they will just attract to this niche of the system. Then with the appearance or the presence of earthworm, so it can also help to form the microbes community in soil, because for earthworm, through their feeding activities, they will inject the soil particles, they consume the organic matters, but then through the gut of earthworm, actually it's a very good site for them to input the microbes to their cast. So therefore, we do have quite a lot of study that the earthworm gut actually is a very important site for the microbes to form a good community inside. And then through their casting activities, the microbes can also fix to those soil particles. That means the cast particle, the aggregate, and then they can go back to the later soil. So this would be very important point to note. Okay, last terminus. Other than the in situ practice for conserving the resources in agriculture, the presence of earthworm can also help with the soil health by having the that means the off-site performance. Okay, because if you heard about the vermicomposting, so this would be a kind of a good trend that people make use of earthworm to convert the organic material into the humus-like material. And then even just like in Hong Kong, people start to think about how can we make use of earthworm to deal with the domestic food waste. Okay, so people are just like me. I also keep the compost worm at home, and then every day if I generate any apple peels or the banana skin, that I just feed them. And lastly, I can get the compost then I can use in the farm, just like this. So therefore, this process actually is a very good way to solve the waste problem, as well as to maintain the soil health. But what is vermicomposting? So as I mentioned, casting activities of earthworm actually is a very important activities to convert the soil properties, including the physical and also even the chemical properties of soil. So therefore, for those composting worm, they will inject, okay, their organic waste as their food through their mouth. So they go through the whole digestive system, they pass through the gizzard, they have the microbial diversity, and then they pass through the intestine, just like the gut, then goes to the anus. Then lastly, they will just generate the vermicompost as their cast. And actually, the nutrient profile of their cast is very good. So therefore, it is a very good source of compost. And the presence of worms, they can also have a better way or more efficient way to deal with the organic matter. Then you only put the organic matter on the land and then just allow the microbials to do its work. So therefore, here I'm showing you some kind of common types of composting worm that has been used all over the world. And then one of the most common one or most well-known one is this one. So this would be the red rugus. And then the Eisenia. So these two species has been highly or greatly used in the vermicompost. And therefore, I just interested to know what would be the best recipe for the Isania to increase the plant crop use by having or by producing the vermicomposting. So here is a kind of preliminary study and result that I would like to share with you. So the objective of this study is I want to investigate what would be the composition of domestic food waste and also the Chinese herbal medicine residues. So what is the Chinese herbal medicine? Just like in Chinese culture, we will make use of different kinds of plant species, the dried plant specimen. Then we will just put it as a soup. So we will name it as the herbal medicine. But then after we are having the soup, then it will just generate quite a lot of residues of this. But actually, this kind of residues is kind of valuable. So it would be the organic matter. So therefore, in this study, we want to see whether we can make use of the food waste and also this kind of herbal residues to be the source for vermicompost, and how would be the recipe, what would be the ratio to control the quality of vermicompost for that. So therefore, we decide the 6 treatment, and then we have a 60-day incubation to collect the vermicompost. Then we'll also follow with a test to analyze what would be the quality of plant crops and seed generation, seed germination. Then here is the result. Firstly, we look at the soil chemical properties and also the nutrient level after the incubation. So you will see that for the vermicompost, actually the pH will be quite high. So that means after the incubation, the pH would be around, the average value would be around 5 to 5.5, okay, or below 5. So actually it is kind of a matter to earthworm, because earthworms are, in theory, they love the neutral soil, so just the pH around 6 to 7. So if you put them into acidic soil, sometimes they cannot survive. So therefore, we also have a follow-up experiment to test what would be the survival rate of the compost worm. And then we also test on the EC and also the total carbon. Then you will see that under different treatment, actually, they just have different kind of variation in this parameter. But then if you compare the treatment to the control, okay, so that means the control is without any earthworm. So actually, the total organic carbon will be much less than the control, of course, because the compost worm, they will consume the organic matter in soil in a short term. But then if you look at the nutrient level of the vermicompost, just like the nitrate concentration, the nitrate, ammonia, so the treatment actually is also kind of quite a high variation for this. But then for some of the treatment, they can still maintain the nitrate concentration for that. Then we need to test what would be the quality of the vermicompost by having the classic germination test. All of the treatment can pass the GI percentage, which is over 80. So this is no toxicity found in the vermicompost. Then we also conducted a plant growth test. So we made use of the lettuce and see what would be the root length and also the germination index. So all of this would perform very good. So therefore, after this preliminary study or my previous study, we can identify the importance of earthworm as a soil bioindicator in land management practice, especially in the agricultural land and even for the urban development. How can we make use of the vermicompost? How can we deal with the waste management? So they can be a very important indicator, and how can we apply this kind of knowledge and spread the knowledge to the practitioners in soil or in farming. Secondly, we also want to focus how can we apply the application of eDNA in exploring the soil biodiversity. The reason behind us for study the earthworm community actually is quite difficult sometimes because it's highly seasonal, and we also need to dig the soil into very deep one, and sometimes you can have nothing for a single sampling. So therefore, we also want to apply the new technology as the eDNA and help us to identify what kind of soil animals would be appearance in the soil, and what would be the relationship between the soil biodiversity as the microbial or even the plant crops. So therefore, this would be our focus and their current focus. And lastly, we also want to further study what would be the earthworm and plant relationship. As we mentioned that the presence of earthworm can amend the soil, and it can also have a kind of indirect relationship to the plant crops yield and also the plant growth. And especially when we talk about agriculture, sustainable agriculture, we want to investigate what would be the practice, the best practice to maintain a good soil biodiversity as well as the crop use. Therefore, we should further study how would be the crop rotation by making use of legumes or soybean, or what would be the relationship between earthworm and soybean, and how would they maintain their microbial communities for a better or healthier soil. So this would be our focus. Lastly, I would like to take these opportunities to thank Professor Lam to invite me for sharing. Just have a time to share my research interest with you. And I also want to thank my PhD supervisor, Derek Light from CHK, and also Jerome and TF from the School of Life Sciences for their support for my current research. And I also want to thank my collaborator from Shanghai and also from Hong Kong Baptist University for their long support of my earthworm research. And of course, I would like to thank all of you to spend a very wonderful evening with me. And then I really hope that you would love earthworm after listening to this talk. Thank you.
So who would like to ask about earthworm? So I guess since you will also work on something related to soybean, so that will be very exciting. And I think my potential students here, she also have some idea of how to use soybean to study, how to use earthworm to study the effect of soybean on soil, nutrient recycling, etc. So I guess you probably will have a good collaborations so that we can move this forward and deeper, right? So my comments to most of the ecology papers that they are very good, very comprehensive. But then when we go down to mechanistic studies, then there are still some rooms for improvement, right? But anyway, so let's enjoy some questions from the audience first. Who would like to ask the question first? The first question.
Hello, this is Amy.
Amy.
Hello.
Yeah, I was Professor Lam's student and currently his postdoc. I work on plants microbe interaction, so I'm interested in the possible tripartite interaction among soybean, microbe, and earthworm. And first, we know that when plants, especially when soybean and soil microbe, for example, rhizobium interact, there will be some signaling events. The plants will secrete things like flavonoids to attract the bacteria, and when plants and microbes interact, there will also be other secretions, for example, like peptides, like enzymes. So would these signaling events or would these compounds affect the activity of earthworms? Or what do you think about the possible tripartite interaction among the three parties? And would there be any like signaling events among the three parties? What do you think?
I I'm not the expert in the signaling, but then based on my kind of literature review or from my knowledge, and actually earthworm is also generate the petals. But then I think the relationship between the plant and earthworm maybe not that direct. Yeah, because earthworm they seldom directly consume the plant part, just like the plant would, because there was a myth before, because some of the farmers they just believe that maybe the earthworm they will just take the plant wood and they would be the pest in the agriculture land, but actually this would not, because earthworm they only consume on the degraded organic matter. So therefore, I don't think the plant should have any self-defense system to avoid the presence of earthworm. But then I think, or I suppose that maybe the interaction between earthworm and microbes would be much more direct. Yeah, because as I say that, the earthworm gut actually is a kind of platform to increase the diversity or even the abundance of microbials in the soil, because they, through their daily activities, through the casting activities, so they will pass through the soil particle. So actually they will amend the microbial community of soil if there has earthworm. And there's also kind of some of the research focus to study what would be the microbial community in the earthworm gut. So I think this would be an interesting part to look at in the future.
Yeah, I see. Thanks. So for the microbes, and I mean in the microbes in the gut, so would that mean the earthworm will only affect the soil microbial community only when the gut is exposed to the soil?
No. The kind of the mechanism is like this.
All right.
Because earthworm they take the organic matter, but actually the organic matter would be stick on the soil particle. So you assume that for a kind of a soil core, so we do have quite a lot of soil particle. So each of the particles will cover by the organic matter just like this. So therefore, when the earthworm they inject the soil particle, so they will just digest the organic matter for their own use. But then the other part of the particle, just like including the minerals or other materials, so they will just pass through the whole gut, and then they will just secrete out to the later. Yeah, so therefore, why people they focus on the microbial community in the gut, because inside the gut it would be a anaerobic environment sometimes. So therefore, people just believe that the different earthworm species they may have different formation of the microbes in their gut. So therefore, if you have a better or richer diversity of earthworm species in a single volume of soil, so that means after they gone through the cast activities, then the soil particle would have different kind of microbials. Yeah, the microbials community would be much higher with diversity. Yeah, so therefore the mechanism would be like this, and this is why people feel more focused to the earthworm gut.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Michelle. This is Sandra.
Hello, Sandra.
I also want to follow up on the gut microbiome question. That is, actually, this question is separated into two parts. One of them is, firstly, how do earthworm acquire their gut microbiome? Is it by perhaps inheritance, or do they acquire it from surrounding soil? And also, I would like to ask, just like human and other livestock, there are many studies showing that our domestication and for humans following our agricultural revolution, our gut microbiome has been greatly homogenized, and in fact, our gut microbiome diversity has dramatically decreased. So I'm just wondering, especially when it comes to vermicompost, right now there are so many breeders of vermicomposting earthworms. So is there any study that looks into earthworm domestication and also the related changes in their gut microbiome, as in whether earthworm domestication will homogenize the gut microbiota community, etc. Thank you.
Okay, so it can be your study topic. Yeah, and I think for the first question, so just like what would be the, sorry, maybe I take a water. So I think for the composition of microbes in gut, oh sorry. So I think it would be a neutral process. Yes, because yeah, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, it actually is a lateral process because once the earthworm they present in different kind of soil. So actually in the soil is already have some kind of microbes. And therefore there have a hypothesis that if the earthworm they present in a kind of soil, they will also inject the microbes from the surrounding soil. So it also forms the microbes community in their gut. And for the second question, I don't have much idea on what would be the study that work on the homogeneous types of earthworm microbes in their gut. And yeah, so therefore I think it would be a very good focus for further study.
Thank you.
Okay, so I guess I can talk to Michelle more to make your project more realistic, right? So anyway, any other questions from the audience? And then we ask a question, right? So will the effect of earthworm affected by the climatic factors or soil textures? So if you have different types of soils or under different kinds of weather conditions, will the effect of earthworm differ a lot?
Yes, actually based on my study, and if we stimulate different environmental conditions, it will be highly affect the earthworm activities, especially for the burrowing and casting activities. So just like the study that I showed you, we make use of the CT scan to study the burrows, and we found that if the temperature is too high, just like up to 30 degrees Celsius, then the volume of the burrows would be much lower than the normal temperature, like 20 degrees Celsius. So therefore, we can notice that if the climate change problem, just like we have the global warming, so if the general air temperature increase, it will affect the activities of earthworms. So that means it will also affect their function in converting or in their facilitating the soil ecosystem. And then other than that, the second question would be
the soil type.
Yeah, the soil types. Soil types is also a matter because as I mentioned, for earthworm, when they inject the soil particle, so they will just select which the size of the particle is. If the soil particles is too big or too granular, so they don't like it. Yeah, or if the soil is too clay, that means the soil particle is too small, they also don't like it. So therefore, they will select the soil types, and then especially they will also select the for their food preference. So if the soil types which can contain a higher level of organic matter, so they just attract to this kind of soil, yeah, because they can get more food there. Yeah, so therefore, yeah, soil type would be a matter.
Okay, so I have another question. If I remember correctly, you have mentioned that earthworm can cause an increase of soil carbon dioxide and N2O emission. So it's kind of negative, right? So you increase, especially the N2O. What is the reason of N2O? Is it acting on the inorganic fertilizer, or is acting on organic methods to release N2O?
Yes. So in short term, the presence of earthworm would be a kind of will just increase the carbon or the carbon dioxide emission. Yeah, because earthworm, they are the living organisms, so they also gone through the respiration process. And for soil its own, it also have the soil respiration. Therefore, one is two of these process joined together. In short term, the presence of earthworm will just increase the carbon dioxide emission. But then, because at the same time, the earthworm, they can also play a role to fix the carbon to the soil particle by forming the soil aggregates. So therefore, we believe that in long term, the beneficial outcomes by having the soil aggregates to fix carbon would be outweighed the short-term disadvantages for having the increasing CO2 emission. So therefore, we still believe that the presence of earthworm would be good for soil. And then secondly, the emission of N2O actually is still with the nitrogen cycling. Yeah, because through the nitrogen cycle, the nitrogen will also convert to N2O and then emit from the soil. So therefore, based on the activities or the respiration process of earthworm its own, or the soil respiration, nitric dioxide will also emit out. So therefore, it would be a lateral process. But then if we use the fertilizer, especially for the N-rich fertilizer, we believe that the rate of N2O emission would be also much higher, because you provide more N in the soil, and then the presence of earthworm is just like fasten the cycling of these nutrient level. Yeah, so therefore we still suggest that actually if we have earthworm, we can already speed up the nitrogen cycle, so no need to add any other kind of fertilizer.
When you say cycling the nitrogen, do you mean the breaking down of organic big molecules in the soil, or is also related to the applied fertilizer like urea or ammonia? So will earthworm work on both, or they just prefer be using the big molecules?
They prefer to use the big molecules. So they the story is the presence of earthworm, so they will break down the soil particle or break down the organic matter, because they are the decomposer. And once they break down the organic matter, it can facilitate the microbes to do its own work. So the microbes, including the nitrophilic bacteria, then they can have kind of a better activities to complete the end cycle. Yeah, so therefore, I would say that the presence of earthworm, they do have kind of indirect relationship with the nitrogen cycling, because they should facilitate the microbial activities, then the microbes will facilitate the conversion of nitrogen in the nitrogen cycle.
All right, so is there any other questions from the audience? Joanna, you have to unmute yourself. Joanna, unmute. Yes. Please.
Hi, Michelle. My question is there any correlation or finding talking about the relationship between the crops that you grow to the species or the variety of the earthworms? Because it seems the earthworms has many different variety and they seem to be feeding on different things. So I'm just thinking from the other end, if you grow more certain crops or plants, will you grow certain type of earthworms more? And is that beneficial or not beneficial?
Yeah, I noticed that some study, so they will compare what kind of crops that growing on the land would benefit which species of earthworms. Yeah, but based on my own study, my ecological study around Hong Kong, I don't find any special or specific relationship between the earthworm species with the vegetation species. Yeah, and my finding would be the earthworm communities would be higher depends on the land use. Yeah, if the land use is a lateral one, just like the secondary forest or lateral grassland, so they will form a community for this kind of lateral habitat. But then they cannot survive in the urban habitat. So therefore, this would be two types of communities in Hong Kong. Yeah, by having the rural and also the urban gradient. So therefore, I cannot say that we can, yeah, maybe we should study. So what would be the plant species affect the earthworm species that we can find in the nature?
I see. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, but sorry. But theoretically, people believe that the legume part would be beneficial to earthworm because of the nitrogen supply. Yeah.
Yeah, we should try.
Yeah, we should try it out. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, I think it's a very complex interaction between the crop types, the cropping system, the soil type, and the global climate change. Right. So I think we should start with a simple system to establish it first, and then ask for international collaborators to collect samples from different habitats and to make it a more global study. But before we can make a proposal to our friends, we need to work out a system first. Some effective system that we can get the data accurately and rapidly. Because in the field, I always worry about the sampling. Because when you have discovered such and such earthworm in Hong Kong or in whatever area, how do you assess the comprehensiveness for your sampling? Is it already an accurate reflection of the earthworm biodiversity there? So yeah, so how would you assess the comprehensiveness of the sampling? Is there any way to do that?
Actually, my collaborator in Shanghai Jiao Tong University, so they are the lab that specifically work on earthworm taxonomy. So they do have a very tedious survey work all over China. And then this is why I collaborate with them, because they also want to learn about the species in Hong Kong. But for their point of views, they want to build up a checklist or the species list for the whole China. Yeah, so therefore, I would say that for my previous study to work on the ecology of earthworm in Hong Kong, actually it's not enough. Because if you look at the site map, I can only cover the central part of Hong Kong, but then I didn't perform any survey in the island, just like Hong Kong Island or the Lantau. Yeah, so therefore, even in Hong Kong, I think the study is not comprehensive enough. Yeah, so I should improve it. Yeah, so I also agree that, yeah, if we can collaborate with international parties, we can get more data on what would be the community look like and what would be the relationship between the soil types and also the croplands. So I think this would be, yeah, very good, and we may publish better data. Yeah, we can publish a good paper.
Okay, all right. Okay, so let me see whether there's any further questions. Okay, it seems like everyone's hungry. But before I let any people go, may I just introduce the next talk. So we haven't got a poster yet, but we will have one in February, and it will be given by our colleagues, Professor Shirley Che, who is a public health professor. So she will share with us her some findings related to the dietary habits and the potential contaminant and its health effect. Some of the contaminants could be from pesticides, and some of them probably from plastic, and how it will affect our health by accumulating them through our diet. So I think it's a different kinds of topic talking about food, but it's all related to agriculture. So we will send you the invitation through email, since today we haven't prepared the poster yet. But just stay alert. So we already line up speakers from February to May. So there will be different topics then. But the February one, after the New Year, you eat so much food, and then she will tell you whether it's healthy or not by eating so much firing food. Okay, it will be her topic. All right. So with that, I thank Michelle for the excellent talk, and thanks everybody who has been participating in this talk series. So see you, and see you in February. Okay.
Yeah,
Bye.
thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Yeah, happy Chinese New Year.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Bye.